Hi, I'm Skip Nipper. Welcome to my podcast where I tell you about Nashville's great baseball history and traditions.
Shot to right, a one-hop liner.
Certainly about its past, especially about Tom Wilson Park, Herschel Greer Stadium, Sulphur Dell, but also a little bit about its present and future too.
Yes, he can. It makes the waist-high catch.
And I introduce you to players, coaches, and other fans and their love for everything baseball.
The high fly ball down the right field corner, going way back, hits a lead-off home run.
If you're like me, some of the memories that you may have are attached to a certain date, certainly birthdays, your death of your father or your mother, the day you were baptized, a lot of different things like that, when you attended your first baseball game. And that's an important part of our history, I think, to be able to recollect certain things. Now, I wasn't there back in 1940, but there was a special event that happened on September the 10th in 1940. And to lead up to telling you about that is a tie to Nashville baseball history, the old Nashville Vols baseball club, and that championship season they had in 1940. I want to tell you about a special player, and he's tied into that event. There are interesting things that happened to him along the way. His name is George Jeffcoat, George Edward Jeffcoat, the older of two brothers who played in the majors. He spent 2 full seasons and parts of another 2 pitching in the National League. And he had a record of 7 wins and 11 losses in 70 appearances between 1936 and 1943 with the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Boston Braves. After his playing days, he was an ordained Baptist minister and served as a church pastor for 17 years. And his story is an interesting one. He was born on December the 24th, 1913, in New Brookland, South Carolina. His father was a security guard at the cotton mill in nearby Columbia, and he began teaching his 4 sons to play baseball by the time each one turned 5 years old. Interestingly enough, each one played for the Columbia Mills Ducks semi-pro team, and each one was signed by a major league organization. Now, when he was in his teens, George Jeffcoat's mother died in a traffic accident, and their father died in 1944 when George was 31. But he supported his brother Hal and his sister Nellie, younger. The other brothers were up and grown. George briefly attended the University of South Carolina, but he left to get married, and he also signed a contract early in 1935 with Dodgers scout Blackie Carter. He was 5'11" and weighed between 175 and 180 during his playing days, and he relied on his curveball as his go-to pitch. He was assigned to the Dodgers farm team in Leakesville, North Carolina, in the Class D Bi-State League, where he won 20 games his first season as a pro, and he averaged a strikeout an inning. And he made his major league debut at age 22 on April the 20th, 1936, with the Dodgers. He went on to appear in 40 games, although he sprained an ankle in July that year and was on crutches and missed several weeks. His manager was the great Casey Stengel, but Burley Grimes took over in 1937. Grimes was a pitcher, and he began working with Jeffcoat to sharpen his control. His performance improved under the tutelage of Grimes enough as the season progressed that Grimes gave him his first start in 6 weeks, and George Jeffcoat responded by shutting out the Pittsburgh Pirates on 4 hits on July the 21st. The complete game, his only major league shutout, was the 6th time he had pitched in 8 days, but his season was derailed the next day by an attack of appendicitis. And after his appendix was removed, he was sent home for the rest of the season. Now, arm trouble then plagued him, and Jeffcoat was sent to the minors in 1938 to Kansas City, but he really must have had some terrific arm issues because he threw just 3 innings in 2 games all season long. He returned to the Dodgers early in 1939 and pitched 2 shutout innings on opening day. But it was the last appearance that he would have for the Dodgers. Now, this I find fascinating. He wore uniform number 42 that day, the last Brooklyn player to wear 42 until Jackie Robinson in 1947. That's a good trivia question for you to ask your friends. After he was sold to the Nashville Vols on May 10, Jeffcoat told a teammate, "I'm going to pitch my way back to the majors," Red O'Donnell reported for the Sporting News, but he ended up pitching the next 4 seasons for Nashville in the Southern Association. He went 14-6 with the 1940 Nashville Vols, a team determined to have been the minors' 47th best team of the 20th century in 2002 during the 100th anniversary of the minor leagues. And here's the interesting thing that happened on September the 10th, 1940. Jeffcoat set a league record in the playoffs, not in the regular season, by striking out 18 batters, including 7 in a row against Chattanooga. Before delivering his record performance, Jeffcoat had predicted what was to come when he told Nashville, Tennessean sports writer Raymond Johnson, "I believe I've got as good a curve as any of them in the major leagues, and I'm going to show you something." And he did. From the 3rd to the 7th inning of that game, he struck out 14 of 19 batters, and he went 13-12 in 1941 and again in 1942 for Nashville. Jeffcoat, a favorite of Nashville's longtime owner and manager, Larry Gilbert, who listed him as one of the pitchers on his all-time Nashville team, was the opening day starter for the Volunteers 3 straight seasons from 1940 to 1942. Interestingly enough, he got the nod over his soon-to-be much more famous teammate, Johnny Sain, in the latter 2 years, and you'll know the name Spahn and Sain and Pray for Rain about the old Milwaukee Braves pitching duo. In the fall of 1941, Jeffcoat found work as a plumber's helper in the off-season, and no doubt that pay was helpful too for a minor leaguer with a wife and 2 children who was itching to get back to the major leagues. Well, Jeffcoat led the Southern Association in strikeouts in the 1942 season, and he had finished one strikeout behind the leader, his teammate Ace Adams, in 1940. His earned run averages during the Nashville years, never lower than 4.48, were probably inflated by the short right field fence, that famous 262 feet from home plate to the right field fence in Sulphur Dell, the Vols' home park. He had pitched one of just 3 shutouts there in 1939. Well, he was sold to the Boston Braves, where his old manager, Casey Stengel, was back managing, and at the end of the 1942 season, Jeffcoat was counted on to bolster a staff left shorthanded by the draft. World War II was going on, and he was the best curveball pitcher in the Southern Association last year, Gilbert said in March 1943, touting Jeffcoat's chances. He is still a young fellow, Gilbert said, and has plenty of years before him. And Jeffcoat made the big league team that spring. And still just 30, he did well enough as a short man out of the bullpen, 17 2/3 innings over 8 games, but he found himself back in the minors by July, and his final big league appearance came on June the 20th, 1943, when he pitched a perfect top of the 9th against the Phillies in a 7-0 loss. He finished the season with the Indianapolis Indians of the American Association. Now, wartime regulations likely kept Jeffcoat out of professional ball in 1944. He had taken an off-season job as a lineman with a telephone company in Charleston, South Carolina, and the wartime rules prevented him from leaving that employment while the war continued. So Jeffcoat's only baseball that summer was with a Charleston City Sandlot team. The following year, Jeffcoat was back with Indianapolis, where he pitched well enough against and for still war-depleted rosters. 3 of his 7 victories were shutouts, and his 3.63 ERA was more than a run lower than his lifetime figure in the minors. But it was nearing the end of his career, and he gave it one more shot in 1946, playing for Tulsa and then Shreveport in the Texas League, but not successfully, as he lost 14 of 18 decisions and carried a 5.35 ERA before being released. He returned to Larry Gilbert in Nashville, where his brother Hal would play briefly that season before hanging up his spikes for good. In 1953, in September, he enrolled in the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary after being licensed to preach by the State Street Baptist Church in Casey, South Carolina, and he graduated from seminary in 1955. After ordination, he was briefly assigned to missionary work before serving for 17 years as the pastor of the Old Lexington Baptist Church in Leesville, South Carolina. He died much too soon in Leesville on October the 13th, 1978, at age 64. But on September the 10th, 1940, in the opening game of the Southern Association playoffs, George Jeffcoat and his amazing curveball mesmerized the Chattanooga Lookouts, and he struck out 17 of them in leading the Nashville Ball Club to what would become a league playoff championship and a Dixie Series title.